General Hospital will reveal exciting details on Tuesday, April 8, 2025. First, in the midst of her financial desperation, Ava meticulously assessed her situation, her mind racing with possibilities to alleviate her mounting debts. The weight of unpaid bills and looming financial obligations had been crushing her for months, leaving her sleepless and anxious. It was during one of these restless nights that she recalled the critical information she possessed, a secret that could potentially solve all her monetary problems in one swift move. Ava had accidentally discovered the shocking truth about the accident that had left Rick and Liz severely injured. Through a conversation overheard at the hospital and a telling glimpse of Christina's suspicious behavior afterward, Ava had pieced together the horrifying reality. Christina, consumed by vengeful rage toward Liz over some past grievance, had deliberately sabotaged the brakes of their car, causing the devastating crash that now had Rick fighting for his life in intensive care. The hospital scene remained vivid in Ava's memory. Liz, though now conscious, lay pale and fragile in her hospital bed, her body covered in bruises and bandages, while doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Rick, whose condition remained critical. The medical staff spoke in hushed, concerned tones about his internal bleeding and severe head trauma, giving him uncertain odds of survival. The gravity of Christina's actions was undeniable. This wasn't merely reckless behavior but a calculated act that could easily be classified as attempted murder. Ava understood the legal ramifications perfectly. If the truth emerged, Christina would face serious criminal charges, years behind bars in a state penitentiary, her future completely destroyed. The evidence was substantial enough that no expensive lawyer could fully extricate her from the consequences. This realization led Ava to her morally questionable but financially promising plan. Sonny, with his vast wealth accumulated through both legitimate businesses and shadowy enterprises, would never allow his daughter to suffer such a fate. His reputation for protecting family at all costs was legendary in their circles. After days of careful consideration, Ava approached Sonny discreetly, arranging a private meeting away from prying eyes and potential witnesses. She watched his face transform from irritation at her unexpected request to horror as she methodically revealed what she knew about Christina's involvement in the accident. Sonny's initial disbelief quickly gave way to grim acceptance as Ava presented the damning details that only someone with knowledge of the crime could possess. His eyes, usually cold and calculating when dealing with enemies, now reflected fear and desperation, the unmistakable look of a father terrified for his child's future. Ava proceeded with her demand, a substantial sum of money in exchange for her eternal silence on the matter. She was careful not to appear too eager, maintaining a facade of reluctance, as though the decision to blackmail him weighed heavily on her conscience. In reality, she had already determined the exact amount needed to clear her debts and provide a comfortable cushion for the foreseeable future. Sonny, despite his reputation for dealing harshly with those who crossed him, found himself cornered. The alternative to paying Ava was watching Christina's life crumble under the weight of a criminal conviction, something his paternal instincts simply wouldn't allow. As Sonny contemplated the proposition, Ava could almost see the mental calculations behind his eyes. Weighing the cost of the payoff against the value of his daughter's freedom. She knew he was also considering the darker option of eliminating her as a threat, but the risk was too great. If anything happened to Ava after their meeting, suspicion would immediately fall on him, potentially exposing the very secret he sought to protect. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Sonny, who had built an empire through intimidation and force, now found himself on the receiving end of a power play he couldn't counter with his usual tactics. The tension between them was palpable as Sonny finally agreed to her terms, his voice barely audible as he negotiated the logistics of the payment. Ava maintained her composure, refusing to show the relief and triumph surging through her. She had gambled on Sonny's love for Christina outweighing his notorious vengeful nature, and that gamble was about to pay off handsomely. As she left the meeting, Ava felt a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction at solving her financial problems, apprehension about the dangerous game she had initiated with one of the most powerful men in the city, and a small, nagging sense of guilt for profiting from a situation that had left Rick clinging to life and Liz physically and emotionally scarred. Nevertheless, she pushed these conflicting feelings aside, focusing instead on the financial security that awaited her once Sonny delivered the promised sum, a payment for silence that would change her life, even as it protected Christina from the consequences of her vengeful actions. Second, Olivia stepped forward as mediator in the escalating conflict between Dante and Brooke Lynn, whose teenage parenthood secret had been explosively revealed. The revelation that they had conceived a child during their adolescence had created ripples of tension throughout their interconnected lives. Brooke Lynn's marriage to Chase was particularly strained, as the revelation came shortly after Chase had discovered his own infertility, making the secret feel like a double betrayal. Chase struggled to process that his wife had not only hidden a pregnancy from him but that the father was Dante, his close friend and colleague on the police force. Meanwhile, Lois, Brooke Lynn's mother, had conspicuously disappeared from Port Charles, avoiding confrontation about her role in arranging the private adoption years ago. Her absence only fueled suspicions about the legality and circumstances of the adoption process. Olivia recognized that the priority needed to shift from blame to action, encouraging everyone to focus on locating the child rather than dwelling on past decisions made by scared teenagers. The situation took an unexpected turn when Gio Palmieri, a 17-year-old supposedly distant relative of the Cerullo family staying at the Quartermain mansion, entered the room briefly. Both Dante and Brooke Lynn found themselves drawn to the teenager, noticing familiar mannerisms and features that suddenly seemed significant in light of recent revelations. Olivia too observed the striking similarities between Gio and Dante, planting the seed of suspicion that perhaps their search had already ended before it began. The possibility that Gio might be their biological son transformed the dynamic entirely. If true, it meant Lois had orchestrated an elaborate 16-year deception, creating a fictional family connection to explain Joe's presence while keeping everyone, including Gio himself, in the dark about his true parentage. Brooke Lynn resolved to speak with her grandmother Gloria, who might know the truth about what happened during that summer in Bensonhurst when Brooke Lynn was sent away, to connect with her roots, but was actually hiding her pregnancy. Unbeknownst to any of them, Martin Gray, the attorney who had helped Lois arrange the adoption years ago, was currently in Port Charles on unrelated business. He possessed the legal documentation that could confirm or refute their suspicions about Joe's identity, adding another layer of complexity to the already tangled situation. As Olivia continued her efforts to maintain peace between all parties, the focus shifted to uncovering the truth while minimizing the inevitable emotional fallout, particularly for Gio, who remained oblivious to the fact that he might be at the center of this life-altering family secret. Third, Elizabeth lay in her hospital bed, her broken leg elevated as she recovered from the devastating car crash that had nearly claimed her life. The quiet atmosphere was disrupted when Ava entered, tears streaming down her face as she revealed Rick's critical condition, internal bleeding, brain swelling, and the doctor's increasingly pessimistic prognosis. Despite their complicated history, Elizabeth felt genuine concern for her ex-husband. Ava then delivered the shocking truth: Christina had deliberately cut the brake lines, intending to harm Ava but instead endangering Elizabeth and Rick, who had become collateral damage in her vendetta. Elizabeth's disbelief quickly transformed into cold anger as Ava presented compelling evidence of Christina's involvement. Elizabeth processed this information silently, her mind racing through the implications. Her marriage to Rick had dissolved after her miscarriage, a loss that continued to haunt her years later. That Christina's blind pursuit of revenge had now endangered both Rick and herself felt like a cruel twist of fate, reopening old wounds Elizabeth had worked hard to heal. The injustice of being injured because of someone else's misguided vendetta fueled a growing sense of righteous indignation within her, overshadowing her usual caution around Ava. Despite her long-standing wariness of Ava's manipulative history, Elizabeth found herself experiencing an unexpected moment of connection with the woman. There was an authenticity to Ava's distress that transcended their complicated past, a genuine concern for Rick that resonated with Elizabeth's own feelings. Perhaps it was this shared concern, or perhaps it was the pain medication clouding her judgment, but Elizabeth felt the walls between them temporarily lowering as they united against a common threat. By the time Ava prepared to leave, Elizabeth had made her decision to support Ava in exposing Christina's actions, regardless of the inevitable fallout. Their unlikely alliance was sealed with nothing more than meaningful glances and subtle nods, no verbal confirmation needed for the pact they had formed. As the door closed behind Ava, Elizabeth wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake in trusting a woman known for manipulation, or if she had taken the first necessary step toward justice. Whatever consequences might follow, Elizabeth knew there would be no turning back now. Fourth, finally, Lulu and Dante had their long-overdue heart-to-heart conversation about the complicated situation involving Brooklyn and Chase. For weeks, Lulu had been pressuring Dante to confront the truth about the child he and Brooklyn had given up for adoption during their teenage years. Her persistent urgency had created significant tension between them, as Dante found himself caught between his wife's demands for immediate disclosure and the delicate reality of the situation. Brooklyn and Chase's marriage was already strained by this revelation, and Dante had been reluctant to further complicate matters with hasty actions driven by Lulu's timeline rather than what might be best for everyone involved. Dante had maintained a patient silence through Lulu's repeated attempts to accelerate the resolution, believing that such sensitive matters required careful consideration and proper timing. His reluctance wasn't about avoiding responsibility but rather about approaching the situation with the thoughtfulness it deserved. The child they were discussing wasn't merely a secret to be revealed but a person whose life would be irrevocably changed by their decisions. This perspective had been difficult for Lulu to appreciate initially, as her focus had been primarily on honesty and disclosure rather than the potential consequences of poorly timed revelations. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a quiet evening at home, when Lulu finally set aside her own sense of urgency and truly listened to Dante's concerns. The weight of parenthood, both for the child they shared together and for the child Dante had never known, hung heavy in the air as they spoke. Lulu's expression softened as Dante explained the complexity of emotions he was experiencing, the shock of discovering his parenthood after so many years, the guilt over not being present in his child's life, and the fear of disrupting the life that child had built without him. For the first time, Lulu truly understood that this wasn't about keeping secrets but about approaching a life-altering revelation with the care and sensitivity it deserved. By the end of their conversation, a new understanding had formed between them. Lulu acknowledged that her pressure had come from a place of love but had failed to consider the full complexity of the situation. She now recognized that Dante and Brooklyn, as the biological parents, carried a unique burden and responsibility that deserved respect and space. Their shared commitment to eventually finding and connecting with their child remained, but with a newfound patience and mutual respect for the process. The tension that had been building between them dissolved into a stronger bond, forged through honest communication and genuine empathy for each other's perspectives. Together, they would face whatever came next, not on Lulu's timetable or anyone else's, but in a way that honored the love they all shared for a child who had yet to know the truth of their origin. Finally, Alexis Davis sat across from Diane Miller in the quiet corner of the Metro Court restaurant, her coffee untouched as anxiety visibly consumed her. The weight of recent events had etched new lines of worry across her face, and the usual sharp, confident demeanor that defined her legal career had given way to the raw vulnerability of a mother fearing for her child's future. Alexis had requested this meeting away from prying eyes and listening ears, knowing that what she needed to discuss required both legal expertise and the understanding of a trusted friend. As the conversation turned to Christina, Alexis's voice dropped to a whisper, her hands trembling slightly as she detailed her daughter's involvement in the car accident that had left Rick Lansing fighting for his life and Elizabeth injured. The evidence against Christina was damning and growing more substantial by the day. The mechanic's report had confirmed that the brake lines were deliberately cut, a premeditated act rather than a moment of passion. Witnesses had placed Christina near the vehicle shortly before the accident, and most damaging of all, Rick had regained consciousness and remembered seeing Christina at the scene. Alexis explained to Diane how Christina's grief over losing baby Adela had transformed into an obsession with punishing Ava, whom Christina blamed entirely for her child's death. What had begun as understandable grief had morphed into something darker, culminating in an act that had nearly killed two innocent people who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The legal ramifications were severe, as both women well understood from their years practicing law. Christina could face charges ranging from criminal negligence to attempted murder, with potential sentences that could see her daughter spending years behind bars. Alexis's legal mind could clearly assess the situation, the premeditation, the serious injuries, the lack of immediate remorse. All factors that would weigh heavily against Christina in court. Yet her maternal instincts refused to accept that her daughter, despite her terrible choices, deserved to have her life destroyed by one act committed in the depths of grief and mental instability. Beyond the legal consequences loomed the devastating personal fallout that awaited their family. Molly's relationship with Rick had grown stronger over the years, father and daughter finally building the connection that had eluded them during her childhood. When Molly discovered that her own sister was responsible for nearly killing their father, the family would fracture in ways that might never heal. Sonny, with his black and white view of loyalty and betrayal, would be torn between protecting his daughter and acknowledging the severity of her actions. The ripple effects would touch everyone in their extended family, forcing painful choices and creating divisions that could last for years. Alexis's voice grew steadier as she moved from outlining the problem to proposing a solution. She formally asked Diane to represent Christina, believing that her friend's renowned legal acumen represented their best hope for mitigating the consequences. Alexis acknowledged that she was too emotionally involved to effectively advocate for her daughter, her judgment clouded by maternal love and fear. Diane was not only one of the best defense attorneys in the state but also someone who understood their family's complicated history and could approach the case with the necessary balance of compassion and strategic thinking. Diane listened thoughtfully, her expression giving little away as she considered the request. The case would be challenging on multiple levels, legally complex, emotionally charged, and highly publicized given the prominent families involved. She weighed several potential defense strategies in her mind. An insanity plea based on Christina's grief-induced breakdown, arguing diminished capacity, or negotiating a plea deal that would prioritize psychiatric treatment over incarceration. Regardless of which approach they ultimately pursued, both women understood that Christina would need intensive psychological help to address the trauma and grief that had driven her to such desperate actions. As their meeting concluded, no definitive answer had been given, but a silent understanding passed between the two longtime friends. Whatever legal strategy they developed, the priority would be saving Christina from herself while ensuring justice was served in a way that allowed for healing rather than merely punishment.